Hi, I'm Grady Collane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Do you mind introducing yourself for our listeners?
Sure, my name is Andrew Gottlieb, and the Executive Director of APCC.
All right, awesome. Thank you for joining me in studio today.
Always glad to be here to talk to you.
So we want to chat more about, there's a couple of topics. Mainly, we have a new facility that's coming for the association. We've also had Barnstable County announcing some more efforts to help preserve water quality using satellites. So we wanted to touch on that as well and talk a little bit more about conservation and affordable housing involving Joint Base Cape Cod. But first things first, for people who might not be familiar, can you tell us more about what the organization does?
Sure. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod is the region's largest environmental advocacy and education nonprofit. We focus on issues of concern across the region as it relates to environmental quality, and have been doing so for 55 years.
All right, awesome. So as well, you guys do testing throughout the summer when it comes to water quality. A lot of bacteria, algae blooms, those have been just becoming more and more of a nuisance as of late with water quality diminishing on Cape Cod. So talking a little bit more about that, we have this new facility, the Koppel Center, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this new facility is going to help your mission?
Sure. So we're really excited about the Koppel Center to Preserve Cape Cod. Our board voted in October to proceed with the project. We're utilizing an existing historic structure on our property. It's an old barn that is in desperate need of upgrading, and so we're taking advantage of the opportunity to build this center, and it's both by name and also reality. We're at the center of Cape Cod in our headquarters in Dennis. So we're constructing this facility in keeping in mind the notion that, we like to be at the center of all important environmental conversations that are happening on Cape Cod. And so the facility will provide a multitude of services to the organization. It'll provide convening space. We're going to have a large meeting space that can be broken up into two so that we can run our programs and our landscape, in particular our landscape programs, out of that office location. We'll be able to invite other organizations in to meet with us, to have conversations about matters of environmental concern. We're going to allow the facility to be used by other like-minded and affiliated organizations so that, we're hoping that all the important environmental conversations will happen at that location. The other parts of the facility that we're really excited about are we're going to be able to expand our water quality program areas so that we'll have staff will have the ability to do their work, do their water quality analyses in a proper facility that's sized and scoped to meet the needs of the complexity of the water quality challenges that we're facing. And we're also going to be able to have some additional staff working space in the facility so that we've been fortunate enough to be able to grow in the last couple of years, and we need room for our staff. So it's a really flexible space that's going to allow us to do a lot and put us in a better position to meet the challenges of the environment as we see them.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Now, being it's a barn, so if you're using an existing development, was that important as part of like a message to just reduce, reuse, recycle, essentially, or was it just convenience?
Absolutely. No. In fact, the property, one of the things that was attractive about this property when it was purchased by APCC 7 or 8 years ago was the fact that it had this existing location on it that clearly was in need of rehabilitation. We're doing the rehab in a way that is respectful of the historic nature of the facility. So it'll look much like it has over the past 100 years. We're staying within the footprint of the building. We're going to be reusing a lot of the materials and wood that we can reharvest from the facility to maintain its historic and rustic character. That said, we'll be highly investing in energy performance. The building will be solar. We anticipate all of our power needs, to be generated on-site in combination with the existing solar arrays we already have on our existing headquarters building, plus that which we're doing here. We're going to be installing solar or electric car charging stations adjacent to the building. They'll be powered by solar. We are utilizing, composting toilets on the facility, so there'll be no additional nutrient loading from the facility into the groundwater around us. So we're doing everything we can to respect the historic nature of it, not to disturb, the lot any more than it already has been, and to just maximize and optimize utilization of the facilities that we currently have.
Between what you're talking about now, especially with wastewater, and some of the conversations we've had with President John Cox of Cape Cod Community College, focusing on the toilets of the future, it seems like a weird thing for us to focus on, but considering a lot of Cape Cod water quality is seemingly traced back to wastewater, and specifically septic and toilet management.
Yeah, well, a lot of, the utilizing composting toilet, it's in many respects, a zero discharge opportunity, and so it's minimizing the footprint of this facility and the utilization of this facility as much as we possibly can. But a lot of what we do at our location, especially around the landscaping, is intended to provide a real-world demonstration in, even though we're a commercial operation, we utilize a residential location and residential house. So a lot of what we do is intended to demonstrate what can be done on a homeowner scale. And so the landscaping that we have on the building and our property, utilizes the native species. It does not require irrigation. It does not require, nor do we provide any fertilization or chemical treatments of the landscape, as an example of what people can do around their own homes. The utilization of the composting toilet, harvesting of rainwater off the roof for reuse in our landscaping, are all intended to provide guidance and bring life to some of the teachings that we provide to people, so that they can actually come at the facility and see how it works, and it might work in their world.
Do you anticipate some kind of public outreach? Do you think people will be able to come visit, or is it more of a private endeavor?
No, in fact, we have, during the summer seasons, historically interrupted a little bit by COVID, given tours of the landscape. We call it our living landscape. And so we actually invite the public to our facility and expect the Koppel Center to Preserve Cape Cod to be very much a public space.
Very interesting. Good to know, especially with putting the money where the mouth is, essentially. So I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the monitoring efforts that you guys do, especially throughout the summer. We've been seeing several email updates, interactive maps related to where water bodies are impaired with algae and other bacterial blooms. Do you mind talking a little bit more about some of that program and a little bit, if you have some data, not to put you on the hot seat, but roughly how many impaired water bodies we've seen this past summer?
Well, so we're in the process now of coming to the end of our evaluation of water quality for our 2023 State of the Waters report, which I anticipate being released towards the end of this calendar year. So I don't want to spoil my lead, but I think, generally speaking, what we've seen is that the vast majority, somewhere 90-ish% of our estuaries fail to meet water quality standards. We'll update that with the 2023 results. In terms of the ponds this year, I think it was a somewhat different year than we'd seen in the last couple around our cyanobacteria. And by that I mean for a lot of the summer, the cyano blooms of concern tended to be concentrated a little bit more heavily on the Upper Cape than we've seen in prior years. We're still trying to understand a little bit the influence of, the wet summer that we had. In many ways it was very much the opposite of the summer of 22, which was really dry and really hot. So how that all played out into the cyano blooms is something, we're still in the process of analyzing the data. Interestingly enough, this week, which we're recording the second week in November, is our final week of cyano sampling for the season, and we still have a handful of ponds that are exhibiting cyano blooms. Even most recently, within the seashore in the town of Wellfleet, a fairly remote, well-protected watershed. So, the message is in many respects the same as it's been since we started having this conversation, which is that nutrient loading from septics, from stormwater runoff, and from fertilizer runoff on commercial and residential properties is combining with warmer water temperatures to create an environment in which cyanobacteria blooms do well, and that with the right combination of circumstances, heavy rainfall, warm days, sunny days that promote plant growth, those things in combination in a particular pond at a particular time of year still have the ability to result in cyano blooms that result in hazardous conditions that people need to be aware of. And we continue to have, really durable blooms in a couple of ponds. In particular, right now it's standing out. Santuit and Mashpee, Ashumet and Falmouth and Mashpee have been particularly sticky throughout the course of the fall. And nothing has changed that reality. As towns have begun to do wastewater management programs, we anticipate seeing improvement in some of the marine environments that these projects are targeting for nutrient reduction. The freshwater watersheds in the areas close to these ponds are lagging behind in some of that municipal work, and so we continue to expect to see cyano being a factor in our lives over the course of the next several summers.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. You guys are you're taking so much data essentially over years, and as we see more towns pushing forward with sewer and other wastewater solutions, are you seeing the diminishing of water quality issues in those areas as more projects get completed?
I mean, the irony is that we're seeing more municipal investment in wastewater infrastructure than we've ever seen on Cape Cod, and yet we continue to see declines in water quality. And the reason for that isn't that these projects aren't going to work. The reason for that is it takes time to build them. And it takes time, once they're built, for the nitrogen that's been put in the groundwater from septic systems to work its way through the system. And so there's going to be a time lag between when these projects are constructed and are fully functional and when the residual from prior years discharge into the groundwater work its way through. The good news is that the stuff that was put in the ground this year, last year, the year before is going to work its way through, and to the extent that those homes that contributed that nitrogen are now on sewers and are not contributing new, that's to the good. And so, people need to sort of be patient, to wait to see the investment. You're not flipping a switch. We took decades of nitrogen loading to achieve the poor water quality that we're experiencing. It doesn't start to get better until we stop, but even once we've stopped, there'll be a little bit of a time lag, but it'll come.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting and good to know that it might be a while yet before we see that the results, the fruits of our labors. So as well, you mentioned it's the final week, but you're still seeing some blooms. Have you considered maybe extending the season? Is it related to staffing? We even saw a few shellfishing areas in Provincetown recently that faced delayed opening due to high bacteria counts. Now, we didn't want to dive necessarily into the exact cause of that specific instance, but just want to talk more about how we're seeing a longer window for bacteria issues and algae blooms.
Yeah, so there's two separate issues here. With the cyano monitoring, we begin to taper our monitoring down based on the desires of our contracted partners. So a lot of towns start to taper down post-Labor Day. So there's a significant drop-off in the number of ponds we look at post-Labor Day, and then a number of our contracted entities want us to continue doing the work sort of into November. I think by the time we get to November, the number and frequency of concerns are significantly diminished, and people's opportunity to expose themselves goes way down as the water temperatures drop. And so there's some logic to it tapering off. It's a little bit surprising, and it was a little surprising when we started doing the monitoring later into the fall that we still found persistence. And so, there is some ongoing risk. It's low for most ponds, and we would just frankly preach caution to people if the water looks a little bit off. And a lot of the ones that we're seeing right now are pretty obvious. So if you see water that looks of a color that you're uncomfortable with, it's good to exercise caution. In terms of the shellfish closures, a lot of that's driven by stormwater runoff. And so there's some state standards for a given amount of rainfall within a confined period of time, that when rainfall exceeds, and I forget the exact standard, more than an inch in a 24-hour period, there'll be what's known as administrative closures. That there's a presumption that the stormwater runoff for those high intensity rainstorms is going to carry with it enough potential contaminants of fecal matter on pavement into these water bodies that it's appropriate to close them for a couple of days to allow that to work its way through and to make sure that people aren't consuming contaminated shellfish. So, one of the things that we're seeing now is, greater frequency of higher volume rainstorms as one of the ways climate change has manifested itself. And so, those administrative closures are a little bit more frequent. The ones that you might be referencing may have had something to do with that. Towns do monitor for bacteria during the harvest season in those waters, so it's possible they could have identified a contaminant load from those storms, or it could have just been in one of these administrative closures. As long as we continue to have direct runoff from stormwater events, either off the side of the road or because that's how the stormwater conveyance system was designed to perform, as long as we continue to have those and we have these big rainstorms, we're going to have shellfish closures. And so a lot of our work focuses on building stormwater infrastructure that relies on natural processes to intercept and decontaminate stormwater before it's discharged to surface waters, to make sure that, among other things, people can confidently harvest shellfish from local waters without worrying about being contaminated.
Mm-hmm. So it does kind of bring us to that idea of the blue economy, the idea that we can, as the Cape Cod region, we make a ton of our money every year, even regardless of the season, from the coastlines, from our water bodies. So a lot of the conversation topics that you've had have been related to not only conservation, but also economic challenges that are brought on by water quality issues. Did you want to talk more about some of the ways that the stormwater runoff specifically has been involved in some of your initiatives? You've gotten grant money to make designs and whatnot. Can you
Sure.
elaborate?
So, you're right in that, environmental quality is important in its own right, but it's also important to the region as an economic driver. A lot of what happens here economically is driven by people's perception that we have a high quality environment, not just water quality, but also high quality habitat lands and the ability to find open spaces of high quality. And so it's important to the region for a variety of reasons, economics being one of them, that we continue to protect our environmental quality. One of the ways we've worked on that at APCC and gotten some support is around managing stormwater and boat ramps. And so for people that are familiar with boat ramps, they're all sloped to get to the water, right? You got to back a trailer.
Hard to get a boat in the water otherwise,
right,
unfortunately.
Right, and not a lot of thought was given when those boat ramps were laid out as to the fact that all the stormwater that travels and hits the parking area, picks up all the grit, grime, fecal material, oils and greases that are typical of a parking lot, they also follow that same slope and contaminate and degrade those water bodies that people are being drawn to by access to want to enjoy. And so we've been fortunate enough to obtain a couple of rounds of grant funding from both EPA and the State Coastal Zone Management Office to identify high priority boat ramps that have a lot of potential impact on the water quality of the ponds and estuaries that they serve. And we've been developing detailed stormwater control plans that rely on green infrastructure to change the runoff pattern in those boat ramps so that the water that would be flowing from the parking areas down the boat ramp into the pond gets intercepted and purified as it moves from the parking area into the ground. And we've had a lot of success with that. And so we've been expanding that program. As I said, I've gotten a couple of, I think we're up to 3 grant rounds now where we've gotten support for those, and a number of those projects are now moving from conceptual design to the phase where we could go to construction.
All right, awesome. We'll stay tuned in on that progress as it gets a bit further along. Talking about as well all these different technologies, we recently had a release from the Barnstable County officials saying that they are looking into ways that satellite can be utilized to help monitor water quality, especially in the idea that it might help reduce some of the load required for people going out in the field with staffing and volunteers being at a premium. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how the association is involved in that initiative?
Sure. We've been partnering both with Barnstable County. We're a contractor to the Cape Cod Commission on something known as the Freshwater Initiative, where we're sampling 50 ponds, 7 or 8, probably now 8 months of the year, once a month at depth and multiple depths to try to understand the water quality characteristics of these ponds. And as part of that project, as well as a lot of the cyanobacteria sampling that we're doing in partnership with NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, we're looking at matching our on-the-ground field sampling with the dates and times that they have flyovers of satellite imagery. And so what we're trying to do is work up, ways to understand when ponds present certain coloration from the sky, certain clarity from the satellite imagery, what that means in terms of what measured water quality says, so that we can develop relationships so that when we look from a satellite imagery and a pond looks a certain way, it gives us an indication of whether that pond is experiencing and exhibiting high water quality or poor water quality. If it's exhibiting certain characteristics that might indicate a higher likelihood of a cyanobacteria bloom, so that we can not only use that information to guide where we go out and deploy our limited sampling capabilities, so that we are more likely to go to ponds that are at higher risk of cyanoblooms than ponds that are less at risk. And by doing that, have broader coverage of a number of ponds, and the ability to give people a better sense of which ponds are safe and which ones are potentially at risk. But also to be able to look back at the historical record. We get asked all the time, are things getting better, are things getting worse? In a situation like cyanobacteria, where it's a relatively new field of inquiry, we've only been looking at it for 7 years now, and the number of ponds we've been able to look at is limited to about 150, given that there are 900 ponds on the Cape. That coverage isn't what we'd all want it to be. The ability to understand what certain imagery is telling us about a pond actually allows us to go back and look at the historic record and do some backward-looking review to try to get a sense of, well, even though we weren't in the field doing cyanobacteria sampling, over the years, these ponds have shown these characteristics, which we now know to either associate with good water quality or poor water quality. It might give us some insights into what the historic record was that will inform our understanding of, are we doing better, are we doing worse, or have things been this way and we just weren't looking, and so we're not measuring change, we're measuring more of what the baseline was. So the satellite imagery provides us the ability to more intelligently deploy our resources going forward and to understand what types of changes we may or may not be seeing based on the ability to actually turn back time and look.
That's very interesting. It didn't occur to me that we have this fine intersection of archaeology and environmentalism now.
Yeah, so we're still working on the relationships, and we're still trying to understand the information to see what it reliably allows us to say about history. But we're really, I think, not to speak for the county, but speak just for ourselves, really excited about the possibilities that come with better understanding how to utilize the satellites that are already flying overhead with great frequency to help us understand our environment a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. And I know it seems like, satellites are a new technology in the grand scheme of human history, but we have several decades to pull from. Since Cold War, we've gotten plenty of satellites up there to
Right, and then the frequency of flyover and the resolution and what they were recording in those images has changed over time. So, there's a goodly amount of data out there that we think will give us insights into environmental quality.
All right, awesome, very interesting. Do you anticipate that, the buzzword of the year has been, of course, AI. So do you think that there's going to be some kind of involvement or other technologies, especially for extrapolating how water quality looks through a few miles up in the air?
The easy answer, and the one I'm going to give you, is probably. I'm not the person to understand where those intersections and opportunities exist. Fortunately, there are really talented people on our staff at APCC, as well as NOAA and the Cape Cod Commission will be able to understand how to utilize those technologies better than I, but sure.
With the blanket statements as of late. Next time we have you on Sunday Journal will be to interview AI, Andrew Gottlieb.
That's right. That's right. I may not even be real.
We just don't know. So I also wanted to talk with you more about, of course, environmentalism and conservation. It's tied hand in hand with, on Cape Cod, affordable housing. Developments in general, and lately we had Joint Base Cape Cod officials recently saying that they're in the earliest conceptual stages of potentially using 600 acres of the base for affordable housing on Cape Cod. They actually joined Falmouth Select Board members recently to emphasize how early draft that is. But I just want to ask, what are your thoughts on that proposal?
Well, I don't know the details of their proposal. I haven't seen it. Conceptually, it sounds good. We at APCC earlier this year made a much broader proposal that suggested that the already disturbed areas, so the base is roughly 22,000 acres, 15,000 of which is the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, roughly 7,000, mostly focused in the southern and western portions of the base, have been previously developed and represented, had been used historically much more intensively than they currently are now for military operations. Our proposal was that the Healy administration take a hard look at what the existing remaining high-priority military training needs and service needs and Coast Guard needs of the base are, and to determine how to potentially, once those are accommodated, identify the remaining lands that might be utilized for large-scale residential development that could be done in a way that would demonstrate how large-scale development can be done with little or no climate impact. And by that we mean, what opportunities exist to generate the power that would be needed through solar and wind on that location. What are the opportunities that could be done to utilize advanced wastewater treatment, utilizing techniques that allow for the harvesting of waste heat and to be utilized to heat and cool the buildings that would be done there, the ways that you could use anaerobic digestion at the wastewater treatment facility to provide an on-Cape location where all the food waste that needs to be collected and disposed of could be done on Cape that would generate the power and heat needed to again, supplement heating and cooling of those facilities without the use of fossil fuels. So we think there's a real significant opportunity to do something big and bold utilizing the underutilized portions of the base that would go a long way towards solving at least the upper and mid Capes housing shortage for workforce. And so, we're glad to hear that base officials have been looking at a portion of the base for affordable housing purposes. I haven't heard anything that makes me think yet that it's as broadly as expansive as it could and should be to optimize the use of that resource. We're also concerned because we've heard that while some portions of their proposal utilize existing properties within the base, when they potentially move the fence line to put those properties outside the base for development, that part of the proposal also is to utilize lands that are currently outside the base in the town of in the portion of Sandwich known as Forestdale, that is actually the single largest agriculturally restricted property on Cape Cod, and that would take it out of agricultural use and put it towards housing the Windstar Farm. We are adamantly opposed and concerned about that aspect of the proposal. I don't know how seriously that's being considered, having not been presented their broader perspective. But if part of this proposal includes taking lands, agricultural lands, out of production, that would be a huge concern to us.
Mm-hmm. Now, we will have to stay tuned in on that from base officials as well. As that plan continues, we'll definitely be looking for your comment as we go as well. Historically as well, the association has also been critical of how the base utilizes some of the land, specifically as related to proposals for a multi-purpose machine gun range. While we have you in the studio today, just wanted to ask what your thoughts are on that, some of the latest updates from the association's point of view.
Sure. So we obviously have been opposed to the machine gun range, given its siting on the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. Our concerns were bolstered and validated by the draft findings of the United States Environmental Protection Agency that machine gun range, as proposed, represents a significant threat to the integrity of the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. We're extremely concerned that while that EPA process is still ongoing, and while the proposal has not yet even been presented to the State Environmental Management Commission, which ultimately has a say over whether that project proceeds or not, and is consistent with the statutory requirement to be protective of the habitat and water quality of the Upper Cape Reserve, that notwithstanding not having passed through the EPA process or even gotten their permits from the Environmental Management Commission, local base officials have put out an RFP this summer seeking bids for the construction of the facility. And we found that bidding process out not from the Guard, but from a newspaper ad that they were required to file that revealed the fact that they were seeking those bids. And we found out information about the results of the bidding process, again, not from the Guard because they refused to provide any public information about the bidding process, but from a broad public records request we made not to the Guard, but to the Environmental Protection Agency, which provided information that 2 bids had been received by the Guard for that project, both of which vastly exceed the amount of money that was provided by Congress to build the projects. So we have problems with the fact that they're actually proceeding with the bidding with instructions to bidders that they intended to commence construction in the fall of 2023, which I don't know how they could conceivably do that unless they were simply going to ignore the statutory requirements of Massachusetts general laws that require the Environmental Management Commission to approve the project, which they haven't. So we're concerned that they got bids for that and seemed ready to move this fall, and the silence from the Guard leaves one to believe that we're not wrong about that concern, because when we've been wrong, they've been right. They've been very fast to tell us that we've been wrong. But also that we've written to our congressional delegation to say that if they had $9.7 million for this project and they now have bids that require $15 million, that given the concerns about the project and its impact on the water supply, that we're looking for Congress not to, and our delegation not to, support, and in fact to actively identify and oppose any measures taken or steps taken by the Guard to get supplemental funding approved or to redirect funds that were previously approved for another purpose for this project. We're really concerned that in the rush to fund the government that's now slated for November 17th, that something is going to get slipped by without any public input to fund the project, and we're calling on everybody involved to make sure that doesn't happen.
All right, Andrew Gottlieb, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm afraid we're about up at time, but is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners while I still have you about some of the initiatives that the association is undertaking?
Well, we're looking, with eager anticipation that the Healy administration is going to follow through on our recommendation and legal analysis that resulted in a initial denial of Holtec's plans to discharge radioactive wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. We're eagerly anticipating the finalization of that denial, hopefully before the end of this calendar year.
All right, awesome. Thank you for the update very much, for joining us in studio as well, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Always good to talk to you.
I'm Grady Collane, and this has been Sunday Journal.